Hi and welcome. My name is Yesenia Ruiz. Welcome to my week 2 discussion board. So here are the authors and the concepts or theories that we'll be discussing today. And the authors are Roloff, Blau, Keltner, and Rubin. So their actual articles will be in the narration. I don't have them written down on here, but they're actually fully stated in the narration. In the textbook, so the first concept I'm going to cover, it's actually on page 5, and it is equity theory. And it is important because without it, it could cause conflict, which leads to frustration and anger. But the textbook briefly explained how, in order for equity to take place, the actual participant or even outside observer has to feel that the exchange among two people are equal. But of course, what is valued as fair can change over time, so it does have to be evaluated constantly. And this is because people and situations do change. So, what is equitable does have to be looked into. So, in Michael Roloff's interpersonal communication, the social exchange approach, in his book, he basically explained the difference between equality and equity. So equality, you can give everybody the same thing, but does that make it technically equity? No. So what equity is that everybody is on the same platform. And this avoids conflict because two or more people are able to exist and create this relationship where they see themselves as, one group or one member with commonalities where they're able to interact in a specific manner. And I didn't write about them, Walster, and Burschide, I believe, in their equity theory and research. I would have preferred to really touch more bases on that because I feel like their concept also avoids conflict because it explained how years from now, the concept of equity will change from what it is today. And people have to ask themselves what kind of rewards people will seek. And I feel like equity is such an important part in our workplace because at times losing that equity means that there's more conflict because people will see themselves as, above others or even, below others, which does cause tension. The next concept is social exchange theory, which can be found on page 8 in the textbook, and it does explain how people make choices based on their own interests. For example, during interactions, people will look at the rewards and costs. If the reward is too low, then conflicts can rise. The textbook also explained how this theory is not just used in a work setting, professional setting, but it is also used in our personal lives. So because of all this, it is important to look into the needs and values of an individual because it does determine if the trade-off is appropriate. In Peter M. Bloss's textbook, Exchange and Power in Social Life, it explained the importance of exchange in social reward because he stressed that there has to be equilibrium, which the textbook did discuss because it did explain how people look at the reward and cost and balance it with the trade-off. He also explained that when there is equilibrium, it is a motivating factor. But Bloss's approach was more economical because he explained how each individual has something to offer because everyone has something of value. And he further stated how there's an altruism that takes place because people want to reciprocate. And what he means is that if an individual gets a payoff, then they'll be able to reciprocate that payoff. And I think that this is a concept that is kind of makes sense because there's some people who they do receive a good payoff and they don't necessarily reciprocate the payoff that they receive. But of course, there are other people who actually do follow this. If they receive the help and they get a good payoff, then they'll help others, and it is a motivating factor. So I can see both sides of those. So the third concept I'm going to talk about is the collaborative power and how it is used in order to resolve differences and achieve interests. It explained how individuals have to agree that there is a give and take process that takes place in order to avoid conflict. But of course, this requires power. But power can often be seen as damaging or threatening, but it is necessary in order to resolve conflict. But at the same time, ineffective power can cause violent conflicts. So in Mediation Towards a Civilized System of Dispute Resolution, Sam Keltner, he elaborated more on what was said in the textbook. So he explained that there's a give and take process that takes place, and a perfect example is looking at a basketball game. All parties who participate in the basketball game know that it's going to be a win-lose situation. They all agree to follow the rules, and that the outcome is that one party will lose and one party will win. He further explained that we have to get out of the mentality that, all parties will win. That the main thing we have to focus on is creating agreements where participants know that they have to follow the rules. And actually, this is one concept that I really do agree with, because real life situations are not always perfect where every party wins. There's always situations where one side loses and the other one wins. But it all comes down to the participants accepting what supervisors, managers, or even HR states is the right thing to do. And when that is accepted, there is less conflict because the expectations are clear because of the agreements made. So the fourth and final concept can actually be found on page 46 in the textbook, and Rubin touches base on integrative negotiation, and he states, and I quote, "Enlightened self-interest where both parties see that it is in their best interest to help others and achieve their goals," end quote. So in the textbook, it further explains that in order for this to take place, this kind of negotiation, there has to be a lot of creativity and flexibility, because it tries to strive for the most win-win solution possible. So in Jeffrey Rubin's book, Some Wise and Mistaken Assumptions About Conflict and Negotiation, further explains why people act in their best interest. So this has a lot to do with basic human needs and why we act in a particular way, what motivates us, and ultimately it pushes for our behavior, which also includes conflict. But as we learned from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have to meet our own individual needs before we start helping other people. I do find this concept interesting because everybody in the workplace and in their personal life, they do act in their best interest, and this can often resolve conflict or lead to conflict. So I think people should be able to identify, what the person is searching for, what is their purpose, because sometimes conflict can seem pretty difficult to resolve, but at times when you break it down, you can solve, 2 or 3 conflicts or issues with just one solution. But of course, as the textbook explained, it does require a lot of creativity and flexibility in order to try to get as close to that win-win situation. And this is often what, most, even at my job, that's what I tend to see. They try to do what is best for the most. So this is the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.